Alrighty, we are going to continue our discussion on hormones here, and we're focusing in on the aldosterone. So we talked about ACTH last video. Now we're going to focus on the aldosterone. So ACTH is a trophic hormone, so it causes the production and secretion of other hormones. So it causes the production and secretion of aldosterone. ACTH does. So ACTH, released from the anterior pituitary gland, targets the adrenal cortex to produce and secrete aldosterone and cortisol. So in this video, we're going to look at aldosterone. So aldosterone is secreted by the adrenal cortex. It targets the kidneys. So secreted by the adrenal cortex, targets the kidneys to increase sodium reabsorption, so pulling of sodium from the kidney tubules into the blood vessels, into the bloodstream. Also increases water reabsorption, so whenever it's pulling the sodium from the kidney tubules into the blood vessels, it's also taking water with it, so it's increasing water reabsorption, increases sodium reabsorption, so the pulling of water and sodium from the kidney tubules to the blood vessels, which essentially in the bloodstream, and it obviously decreases urine production due to the increased water reabsorption, increases blood volume, and increases blood pressure as well. So aldosterone and ACTH, a stimulus essentially for ACTH, which causes the production and secretion of aldosterone, is low blood pressure. And then the effect obviously is increased blood pressure due to increased reabsorption of water and increased sodium reabsorption from the kidneys into the blood vessels. And that's caused by aldosterone, which increases the blood pressure there. But aldosterone also increases potassium secretion, or causes potassium to be secreted. So what this means is there's a decrease of potassium levels in the blood. So potassium secreted from the blood into the kidney tubules, which decreases the potassium levels in the blood. So with another stimulus of ACTH secretion, which causes aldosterone to be produced and secreted, is hyperkalemia. So high potassium levels, and as we know, aldosterone increases potassium secretion, which decreases potassium levels in the blood. So a stimulus of a high potassium will be balanced out by the potassium secretion caused by the aldosterone, which lowers the potassium levels, in the bloodstream. So stimulus of ACTH secretion, and ultimately which causes aldosterone to be produced and secreted, is low blood pressure, because the aldosterone increases sodium reabsorption, increases water reabsorption, which decreases urine and increases blood volume, increases blood pressure. And also a stimulus of ACTH being released, which causes the adrenal cortex to produce and secrete aldosterone, is hyperkalemia. So high potassium levels, because aldosterone causes potassium to increase potassium secretion, which decreases the levels of potassium in the blood. So low blood pressure, hyperkalemia are stimuli for ACTH being released, which causes the adrenal cortex to produce and secrete aldosterone there. So a decrease in blood pressure leads to ACTH secretion, leads to more aldosterone being produced and secreted, which leads to decreased urine production, increased blood volume, increased blood pressure. And also a hyperkalemia will lead the ACTH to be released from the anterior pituitary gland, causes the adrenal cortex to produce and secrete aldosterone, which will ultimately increase the potassium secretions, which decreases the potassium levels in the bloodstream. So aldosterone, ACTH, it is a negative feedback system. So low blood pressure, aldosterone increases blood pressure. High potassium, so hyperkalemia, aldosterone, and ACTH, which ultimately leads to the production and secretion of aldosterone, causes potassium levels to decrease. So low blood pressure, hyperkalemia, causes ACTH to be released from the anterior pituitary gland. Next video here, we're going to check out cortisol, another hormone that is produced and secreted by the adrenal cortex due to the secretion or release of ACTH from the anterior pituitary gland.